Rhode Island may be the smallest state in the US, but it carries an oversized burden of mystery. Beneath its coastal charm and colonial streets lie fragments of a past that refuse to yield their secrets. Ancient stone constructions, strange inscriptions, and unexplained alignments whisper of cultures and events unrecorded in history books. Some sites appear older than the arrival of Europeans. Others hint at transoceanic contact centuries before Columbus. At the heart of Newport's Truro Park stands the Newport Tower, a circular stone structure unlike anything else in New England. Built of rough fieldstone, with 8 arched openings and a fireplace set into its thick walls, it has baffled historians for centuries. Some insist it's a colonial-era windmill, possibly constructed in the mid-1600s by Governor Benedict Arnold. Yet its design lacks the clear markers of European mills of that period. Others note its striking resemblance to medieval round churches in Scandinavia, fueling theories of Norse exploration in America long before Columbus. The mortar, stone cuts, and unusual proportions hint at influences far removed from colonial architecture. Was it truly a mill, or did it serve as an observation post, ceremonial temple, or even a relic of a forgotten expedition? Standing beneath its shadow, one feels the weight of a story that remains untold, its beginnings erased from written memory. Close examination of the Newport Tower reveals details that deepen its mystery. The arches are not uniform, some are tall and narrow, others shorter and wider, hinting at multiple construction phases, or a blend of styles. The windows and openings appear to align with specific solar and lunar positions, suggesting astronomical intent. Colonial builders rarely incorporated such alignments, but ancient seafaring cultures often did. Mortar analysis has produced conflicting results, some indicating colonial origins, others pointing to older techniques. Carved stones embedded in the walls show wear patterns inconsistent with mere utility. Some researchers even claim faint runic-like markings can be detected on certain blocks, though this remains hotly debated. Could the tower's design be a deliberate fusion of old-world influences and local materials? Or is it simply a case of modern imagination layering myth upon a practical colonial structure? Each stone seems to offer more questions than answers. Among the most compelling theories is the idea that the Newport Tower was constructed by Norse explorers or their descendants. Supporters point to architectural similarities between the tower and medieval round churches found in Greenland and Iceland, settlements tied to Viking expansion. If true, this would place pre-Columbian Norse presence deep into the northeastern seaboard, far from their known Vinland sites. The theory gained traction in the 19th century when relics such as the controversial Kensington Roanstone emerged elsewhere in America. Critics argue there's no direct evidence linking the tower to the Norse, and that stylistic resemblances could be coincidental. Still, the idea persists, bolstered by maritime legends and occasional archaeological finds along New England's coast that hint at transatlantic contact long before the age of exploration. If the Norse theory is true, the Newport Tower could be one of the most significant historical structures in North America. Skeptics of the more romantic theories point to historical records, naming Governor Benedict Arnold as having owned the land where the tower stands. In his will, he mentions his stone-built windmill, which many interpret as proof the tower was built during his lifetime in the mid-1600s. Windmills of that era, however, usually followed standardized European designs, with internal machinery mounts and sail frames, features absent here. Furthermore, the thick stone construction and fireplace seem unnecessary for a mere mill. Could Arnold have repurposed an existing structure rather than commissioned it from scratch? If so, the question shifts from who built it to who built it before him. The colonial windmill explanation answers some questions, but leaves others untouched, making it an incomplete resolution to the Newport Tower mystery. Measurements of the Newport Tower's opening suggest deliberate alignment with the sun during solstices and equinoxes. Researchers have observed sunlight piercing specific arches at exact moments, creating light patterns on the interior walls. Ancient cultures worldwide incorporated celestial events into their architecture, yet colonial builders in New England rarely did so, unless for navigational purposes. Could this indicate the tower served as a kind of calendar or ceremonial site for an earlier culture attuned to the skies? If true, it would point toward a deeper, older purpose far removed from grain milling. Such alignments also fit with Norse, Celtic, and even pre-Columbian indigenous traditions, widening the list of possible builders. The challenge lies in separating genuine intentional alignments from coincidental positioning, as centuries of shifting earth and structural changes may have altered the original design. Despite centuries of speculation, the Newport Tower refuses to surrender its secrets. Archaeological digs have unearthed colonial artifacts nearby, but nothing conclusively tied to its construction date. Preservation efforts have stabilized the structure, but definitive answers remain elusive. Each new theory seems to spark more debate rather than settle it. Was it a relic of European explorers, a colonial oddity, or the last surviving remnant of an entirely forgotten people? For now, it stands silent in Touro Park, a stone sentinel that has outlasted empires, awaiting the day when someone uncovers the truth, or when its story is lost forever. The mystery of the Newport Tower endures because it challenges the boundaries of accepted history, forcing us to admit how much we still do not know. Just off Pojak Point, in North Kingstown, a dark, wave-slick boulder once sat half-submerged, its face carved with crisp, angular characters that looked nothing like colonial initials. Local shell fishermen and winter kayakers swapped stories about the stone for years, but when clear photographs finally circulated, the debate erupted. Were those truly runes, the alphabet of far northern Europe, or merely scratches weather and tide had chiseled by chance? The stone's setting amplified the drama. It lay at the tidal edge of Narragansett Bay, where ice flows grind and storms rearrange the shoreline. Some residents insisted the marks had been visible forever. Others claimed they appeared only recently. Then came a new twist. The stone vanished, reportedly hauled away in the night, only to reappear after a legal tug-of-war that made the mystery feel larger than a single rock. What exactly had been taken? A prank turned legend, or a relic that might rewrite New England's earliest contact stories? The Narragansett rune stone keeps dragging attention back to itself, like a magnetic lodestar tugging compasses off true north. In a region where every cove and point has centuries of layered memory, this carved boulder remains the bay's most stubborn unanswered sentence. Stand before the stone's photographed face, and your mind begins to alphabetize the grooves. Some strokes intersect at sharp angles, others run parallel with an almost ruler-true confidence. A few terminating clean stops that make chance erosion feel unlikely. Enthusiasts overlay Elder Futhark charts, tracing possible words that could resemble names, place markers, or terse memorials. Skeptics counter that our brains are pattern-making machines, eager to force meaning onto randomness. Without an original fixed context, precise location, undisturbed bedding, and a documented chain of custody, authenticity gets slippery. Tidal boulders migrate, surfaces spoil, lichens creep, and a winter storm can grind a century's worth of wear in a single night. Toolmark analysis might help, but wet-sheened stone and salt crystals complicate microimaging, and repeated handling by curious visitors further muddies the surface. Even when scholars agree a stroke is artificial, dating a groove on coastal granite or schist is famously difficult. One camp reads a Norse hand, another sees a 19th century revivalist carving, inspired by Scandinavia's Romantic Age. A third suspects modern mischief, dressed in ancient script. The lines remain, maddeningly confident yet chronologically mute, daring experts to pull certainty from water and weather. Why does the Norse hypothesis cling so stubbornly to the Narragansett runestone? Because it fits a narrative many want to test: seafarers from Greenland or Iceland crossing to North America, probing the coast beyond Newfoundland, and edging into the complex waterways of southern New England. Supporters note that round-trip voyages, though perilous, were within medieval capability, and that coastal promontories here would have offered shelter, timber, and vantage. They point to scattered hints along the broader Atlantic rim: iron rivets, boat nails, saga passages describing wooded lands, and argue that a carved shoreline marker is exactly the sort of practical claim a transient crew might leave. The bay's geography strengthens the romance. Drowned river valleys, hidden coves, and flood-tide channels create a sailor's puzzle box, where a single rock with an inscription becomes both signpost and boast. Yet romance cannot be evidence. No datable Norse camp has been documented on Rhode Island soil, no diagnostic artifacts lifted from stratified layers, no confirmed medieval iron smelt found in situ. The hypothesis, simultaneously plausible and unproven, hangs like sea mist, suggestive silhouettes, no firm ground. And still the carvings glint in photos like wet ink, coaxing imagination to fill the gaps. Long before any hypothetical Norse landfall, Narragansett Bay was the lived and storied homeland of the Narragansett and their neighbours. Stone features, canoe landings, shell middens, and ceremonial places articulate that memory across headlands and islands. Any carved rock here sits inside a dense indigenous landscape of meaning, trade, and travel. Some tribal historians caution that calling every angular line Norse erases local authorship, and the many ways native artisans marked stone through pecking, incising, or abrading, for purposes ranging from boundary signaling to ceremony. Others point to contact-era entanglements, when European goods, symbols, and stories braided with native life, complicating style and origin. Colonial collectors, ministers, and antiquarians added another layer, sometimes copying or enhancing marks to fit theories fashionable in their day. The bay's rocks, in other words, have been read and reread for centuries. The Narragansett runestone, seen through this wider lens, may be less a solitary Norse shout and more a palimpsest: indigenous shoreline, colonial curiosity, modern myth-making. If the carving is old, whose old is it? If newer, why has it resonated so deeply? The answer may require listening to the place as much as measuring the grooves. Coastal archaeology is a race against motion. Tides lift, sand migrates, winter ice scours, and every storm season, red draws the map. Establishing a secure provenience for the Narragansett runestone is therefore as difficult as the epigraphy. Researchers can deploy photogrammetry to capture microtopography, use portable microscopes to assess toolmark morphology, and test for modern residue in protected recesses. But without a stable, legally controlled site, results become a patchwork. Chain of custody gaps invite doubt, removal, and reinstallation, even when done for protection, alter context. Public handling abrades microedges that could distinguish steel from stone tools. Meanwhile, comparative datasets for weathering rates on intertidal boulders are notoriously noisy. Minerals, orientation, biofouling, and microclimate all matter. The most rigorous path forward would triangulate lines of evidence, documented pre-removal photographs, tied to survey benchmarks, high-resolution 3D surface scans, blind toolmark assessments by multiple analysts, and place-based testimony from local and tribal communities. Even then, science might conclude with probabilities, not certainties. In coastal mysteries, beyond reasonable doubt often yields to best supported, a verdict that satisfies method but rarely silences legend. Whatever the inscription's age or authorship, the Narragansett runestone has already done something rare. It made a general audience care about epigraphy, shoreline process, and source criticism. School groups trace the lines with their eyes. Fishermen tell tide time stories. Historians argue footnotes in public talks that draw standing rooms. The stone also forced agencies to wrestle with stewardship in liminal zones, neither holy land nor sea, where artifacts can become both public heritage and private grievance overnight. If the marks are medieval, the stone is a headline. If 19th century, it is still a cultural signal, proof that people here wanted to braid their place into world sagas. And if modern, it is a parable about how myth takes root exactly where mystery is strongest, at the waterline, between one known and another. Either way, the boulder exerts gravity. It pulls disciplines into conversation and keeps the bay's oldest questions restless. Some rocks are mute. This one, for reasons scientific and storytelling, will not stop speaking. Hidden on a granite knoll in Exeter, low walls of carefully stacked stone snake around outcrops and kettles, forming enclosures and passages locals call Queen's Fort. The name honours Cuiapan, Queen Magnus, to colonists, an influential Narragansett leader of the 17th century. Tradition holds that allied families sheltered here amid conflict, yet the fort's age and original design remain unsettled. The walls lack mortar, hugging the natural contour like a second skin over bedrock. Some segments thicken into breastwork, others turn sharply to create pinch points suggestive of defense. But elsewhere, alignments feel ceremonial, framing skylines and boulders as if processions once threaded the ledges. No datable timber survives, and soils on granite are thin, offering few artifacts. Hikers stumble upon the maze and sense intention. This is not random field-clearing debris. Was it a refuge hastily strengthened during war, an older sacred precinct, later repurposed, or a layered place accruing uses across centuries? The stones keep their counsel, sun-warmed by day and cool with evening fog, a granite puzzle, tucked above ponds and pitch pine. Archaeologists approach places like Queen's Fort with a patience that feels almost monastic. They pace wall lines, log turns and thickness, note borrow pits, and sketch how stacked courses lock onto ledge. They listen to what is absent as much as present. No lime mortar, no iron fasteners, no obvious wheel ruts or barn foundations. A defensive reading highlights splayed entrances, hidden approaches, and lines of fire along open slopes. A ceremonial reading sees framed glacial erratics, sightlines to seasonal sunsets, and terraces that could host gatherings. Indigenous knowledge keepers remind us that stone is archive and altar both, and that colonial firefights cannot be the only lens. Yet the site's very spareness stalls resolution. Soil cores yield few seeds to date. Hearths, if any, are ghosted by wind and rain. LiDAR can reveal subtle berms under leaf litter, but not intention. In this kind of granite country, ambiguity is structural. The walls may speak clearest when walked at solstice or dusk, when utility and meaning blur, and the fort becomes stage for more than one story at once. Narrative gravity pulls toward conflict. During King Philip's War, families fled to rough country. A hilltop ringed with stone fits the image of last resort. Defensive logic exists. Choke points, elevation, and rock-backed parapets would slow attackers. But other clues soften the martial lens. Certain wall runs curve to cradle boulders, venerated in regional cosmology. Narrow passages feel processional rather than purely tactical, and a few alignments appear to cite winter sunsets across specific notches. Could the place have been sacred ground long before muskets, later adapted for refuge when danger pressed? Indigenous landscapes are seldom single-purpose. Hunting lookouts become teaching places. Gathering terraces become vow sites. The fort may be palimpsest, layered functions, layered centuries, where memory accreted in stone. That reading resists tidy labels, but it matches the lived complexity of borderlands, where survival, ceremony, and kinship braided together. In the end, insisting on one answer may say more about modern categories than about the intent of those who stacked these walls. Queen's Fort does not stand alone. Across southern Rhode Island, low cairns, turtleback mounds, propped stones, and dry-laid chambers punctuate ridges and swales. Some are indisputably colonial, field clearing and boundary making, but others defy easy assignment. At sites near Exeter and West Greenwich, cairn clusters sit on poor agricultural soil, where stone dumping makes little practical sense. Their placements suggest marking, story-bearing, or seasonal choreography, rather than farm economy. Queen's Fort seems to nod toward this wider ceremonial stone landscape. Lines that point, cairns that answer, chambers that anchor. If the fort belongs to that network, its purpose expands, from defense to choreography of movement and view. If instead, it is chiefly 17th century redoubt, it still likely occupies an older node, chosen precisely because memory already thickened the hill. Either way, the fort's significance grows when mapped beyond its walls, onto a granite grammar written across miles of scrub and ledge. What would settle the debate? A sealed hearth with charred maize, dated by AMS. A buried post-mould ringed with daub. A copper trade bead trapped beneath a fallen corse. A projectile point lodged in a wall seam. Yet granite heights shed evidence like rain. Frost heaves, leaf acids, and hikers' boots erase shallow traces. Porcupines pull apart cairns in search of salt. Well-meaning rearrangements, tidy alignments into shapes they never held. Responsible study therefore leans light, non-invasive mapping, photogrammetry, and consultation with tribal cultural experts who read stone as living practice. In landscapes where written records arrive late and partial, and where colonial eyes often misnamed sacred places as heathen heaps, community memory becomes data. The fort has survived because people noticed it, told children its name, and walked the loops without quarrying the walls for cellar holes. That continuity, fragile yet persistent, is itself a kind of evidence. The ridge has mattered in layered ways for a very long time. Climb to the outer wall near sunset, and the hill resolves into rings of quiet intention. Pine resin warms. A thrush throws a last note into the scrub. Distant pond light flickers through oak. Whether your mind sees bastion or precinct, you feel design, a human cadence laid over glacial stone. Queen's Fort endures because it sits at a confluence. Memory, defense, ceremony, and the stubbornness of granite. Preservation here means more than fencing rocks. It means letting multiple readings breathe, indigenous, archaeological, and ecological, without forcing a single verdict. Some places are most truthful when allowed to remain plural. The fort's stacked courses do not shout answers, they invite return. Come in winter, when leaves are down and the sky notches read clearer. Come in July, when cicadas stitch time tight and shadows pool under capstones. The hill will tell you nothing outright, yet in its durable, quiet grammar, it keeps reminding Rhode Island that some mysteries are best honored by careful questions and long listening. In the wooded uplands of West Greenwich, far from main roads, stonework hides in plain sight. Low walls wander without enclosing fields, cairns stand in clusters on rocky ridges, and boulders are propped just enough to create shadows beneath. At first glance, these features resemble the countless remnants of colonial farming, yet their placement often defies agricultural logic. Walls that end abruptly at a boulder, cairns built where soil is too thin to plough, stones that align with distant ridgelines, rather than property boundaries. Many lie deep in second-growth forest, suggesting they predate the logging booms and farm abandonment of the 19th century. Seasonal sun studies reveal that some formations frame solstice sunrises, or align with equinox light paths through tree gaps. To a hurried hiker, these patterns vanish into the forest's random tangle. But to someone who walks slowly, noting the relationship between stone, slope, and sky, the geometry begins to emerge. It's a language without paper, walls as sentences, cairns as punctuation, boulders as emphatic pauses, telling a story that spans beyond remembered history. The question is whether modern observers can still read it, or if meaning has weathered away, leaving only silent grammar etched in granite and moss. Skeptics often point out that New England is littered with stone piles, the byproduct of centuries of ploughing. But ceremonial cairns differ in ways that resist quick dismissal. Farm clearing piles are usually haphazard, built for speed, and sited near field edges for easy dumping. In contrast, many West Greenwich cairns are deliberately shaped, domed or flattened, layered with smaller stones to create an even surface, sometimes ringed with a base of larger rocks, like a frame. Their distribution across ridges and wetlands suggests deliberate spacing, as though part of a larger network rather than the footprint of a single farm. Some cairns perch atop bedrock knobs, offering panoramic views. Others nestle into low hidden swales. Archaeologists working with tribal consultants have noted that in certain indigenous traditions, stones can serve as offerings, markers for significant events, or anchors for spiritual presence. This possibility shifts the piles from agricultural byproducts to cultural statements. Yet proving intent is challenging. Few cairns yield datable artifacts, and oral histories may not pinpoint specific builders. The distinction then rests on careful observation of form, placement, and context, along with respect for indigenous voices that see more in these stones than mere field-clearing debris. One of the most striking aspects of the West Greenwich stone landscape is its relationship with the sky. Researchers and avocational surveyors have documented features that align precisely with the rising or setting sun at solstices and equinoxes. Some walls run straight for hundreds of feet, before terminating at a boulder that frames the horizon. Others kink at exact angles to catch the sun's path in a notch between distant hills. Cairn clusters sometimes form arcs that echo the moon's extreme positions over its 18.6-year cycle. These alignments require patient, repeated observation, spending dawns and sunsets in the biting cold or heavy summer air, waiting for the light to land just so on a stone face. If intentional, they imply a sophisticated understanding of seasonal change and a desire to embed that knowledge into the physical landscape. Alignments can also serve practical purposes, marking planting or harvesting times, signaling seasonal gatherings, or reaffirming cosmological beliefs. Skeptics argue that with enough stones and enough horizons, some alignments will happen by chance. Yet the sheer number of consistent orientations in these hills makes coincidence feel thin. The stones seem to speak in light as much as in weight, bridging earth and sky through deliberate geometry. For local indigenous communities, these stones are not relics. They are part of a living cultural fabric. Narragansett and other tribal elders speak of landscapes as interconnected beings, where hills, waters, and stones hold memory. In this worldview, a wall is not merely a boundary but a thread. A cairn is not a pile but a keeper of intent. Oral traditions sometimes refer obliquely to stone places as markers of travel, ceremony, or treaty, though exact locations may be guarded to prevent disturbance. Collaboration between archaeologists and tribal historians has grown slowly but meaningfully, allowing for dual interpretations, one rooted in Western science's demand for physical evidence, the other in indigenous epistemology that values relational truth. This partnership has led to protection of certain sites under cultural resource laws, though many remain vulnerable to development or casual vandalism. In some cases, elders have described stone landscapes as maps, not of territory, but of relationships between people, ancestors, and celestial cycles. To walk the network with this mindset is to feel less like a tourist and more like a participant in an ongoing dialogue, one that predates written history and continues under today's canopy. Despite their significance, West Greenwich's ceremonial stone landscapes face constant risk. Suburban expansion pushes new roads and driveways into wooded tracts, fragmenting the network. Uninformed landowners may bulldoze cairns, mistaking them for nuisance debris. Off-road vehicles and hikers sometimes rearrange stones, unintentionally erasing alignments that took centuries to hold their meaning. Even well-meaning cleanups can damage fragile features, removing leaf litter that protects soil cores, or moving rocks to fix perceived collapses. legal protections are inconsistent. Unless a site is formally recorded and recognized as culturally significant, it may have no safeguard against alteration. Education is a key defense. Workshops, interpretive signage, and community mapping projects have helped raise awareness that these are not just random stones. Some land trusts now work with tribal representatives before opening new trails, ensuring sacred sites are respected and preserved. Still, the pace of development often outstrips the speed of documentation. Without sustained vigilance, this chapter of Rhode Island's ancient story could vanish before it's fully understood, leaving only fragmentary photographs and second-hand memories to stand in for living heritage. Visiting the ceremonial stone landscapes of West Greenwich is less like touring a monument and more like learning to read an old weathered script. At first, the forest floor looks ordinary: lichen-spotted rocks, tumbled walls, mossy mounds. But with patience, alignments reveal themselves: a wall that points exactly where the sun will rise on the winter solstice, a cairn whose shadow reaches another at equinox. The rhythm of spacing begins to feel deliberate, and you sense that someone long ago walked this same path for reasons beyond farming. These are not ruins in the grand architectural sense. They are subtle, embedded, requiring humility to appreciate. There is no ticket booth, no plaque, only the slow reward of recognition. You realize that preservation here depends not just on law but on memory, on enough people caring to pass along the knowledge that these stones matter. They are part of a network that connects past to present, land to sky, and human intention to the enduring patience of granite. Walking away, the forest seems to whisper in stone syllables, its message unchanged for centuries. Pay attention, and you will see. On the banks of the Taunton River, not far from the Rhode Island, Massachusetts border, rests a massive boulder known as Dighton Rock, measuring roughly 11 feet long, 5 feet high, and 9 feet wide. It is covered in petroglyphs, carved into its hard grey sandstone surface. The rock's location in the tidal zone means it is often submerged or splashed by brackish water, and early accounts describe locals seeing it emerge at low tide, like a message from another time. Its carvings are dense: lines, curves, geometric shapes, human-like figures, and what appear to be symbols or letters. When European settlers first recorded its existence in the late 1600s, they were already debating who had made the markings. Was it indigenous Wampanoag art, a Norse inscription from wandering Vikings, Portuguese explorers marking territory? Theories multiplied over the centuries, yet no definitive answer emerged. The rock's placement in a dynamic riverbank setting suggests it was meant to be seen by those traveling on water, perhaps serving as a landmark or ceremonial site. Today, the original site is empty. The rock now resides in a small museum to protect it from erosion, but the mystery carved into its face remains as sharp in debate as it is in stone. Dighton Rock's mystery deepened because every observer seemed to see something different in its carvings. Early Puritan colonists speculated that the markings were made by a lost tribe of Israel, an idea reflecting the biblical worldview of their time. In the 18th and 19th centuries, some antiquarians promoted the theory that the carvings were created by Norse explorers, tying the rock to the saga of Vinland. Portuguese origin theories emerged after the discovery of old maps, suggesting that navigator Miguel Corte Real left the inscription during a voyage in the early 1500s. Others proposed Phoenician or even ancient Chinese origins, each theory bolstered by selective interpretations of the shapes and symbols. Indigenous scholars and Wampanoag voices have long asserted that the rock is part of a larger network of native petroglyph sites along the rivers of New England, its carvings encoding stories, events, and spiritual beliefs. The wide range of competing explanations makes the rock a mirror, reflecting the biases, hopes, and myths of each era as much as any historical truth. Without conclusive dating methods for the petroglyphs, certainty remains out of reach, allowing legend and scholarship to mingle in equal measure. Among the most credible interpretations is the view that Dighton Rock belongs to the indigenous Wampanoag cultural tradition. Petroglyphs elsewhere in New England show stylistic similarities, anthropomorphic figures, abstract geometric shapes, and patterns that may represent celestial events or significant gatherings. The rock's prominent location in the Taunton River would have made it visible to canoes traveling between inland settlements and coastal areas, possibly serving as a meeting marker, a boundary stone, or a ceremonial record. Some tribal historians suggest that the symbols could encode treaties, victories, or migration stories, their meaning layered in ways that outsiders cannot easily decode. Oral traditions sometimes speak of places along the river as storied landscapes, where landforms and markings are not inert objects, but participants in the community's history. In this light, Dighton Rock becomes less of an isolated curiosity and more of a surviving fragment of a once rich communication system. Yet centuries of intrusion, alteration, and interpretation by outsiders have clouded its original context. Recognizing it as indigenous heritage reframes the debate, shifting the focus from foreign explorers to the people whose ancestors knew the river as home for millennia before European arrival. By the early 20th century, erosion from the Taunton River's tides threatened to erase the carvings from Dighton Rock. Floodwaters, ice, and silt were wearing down its surface, while visitors chipped pieces away as souvenirs. In 1963, the state of Massachusetts decided to remove the rock from its natural site and place it inside a dedicated museum building at Dighton Rock State Park. This move preserved the stone physically, but it also disconnected it from its landscape, the very setting that may have been central to its meaning. Inside the museum, the rock is safe from the elements, but the viewer's experience is now framed by electric lights, protective barriers, and interpretive panels that present a handful of competing theories. Preservation came at the cost of context, and for some, that trade-off dulls its mystery. Without the rhythm of tides or the sweep of the riverbank, the rock feels like an artifact more than a participant in its environment. The decision remains controversial. Was it better to protect the stone in isolation, or should it have been left to age naturally where it stood for centuries? Part of Dighton Rock's allure is that no one has been able to definitively decode its carvings. The petroglyphs are weathered, making some shapes ambiguous, and the lack of a Rosetta Stone for indigenous symbol systems in the region leaves scholars guessing. Modern imaging techniques, photogrammetry, 3D scanning, and digital enhancement have helped clarify certain patterns, but interpretation still depends heavily on the observer's framework. A Norse enthusiast might see runes, a linguist might see proto-writing, an indigenous cultural historian might recognize narrative forms. The carving's density also raises questions. Were they made all at once, or added over generations? If the latter, then Dighton Rock could be a palimpsest, recording multiple layers of human presence over centuries. This would make interpretation even more complex, as meanings could shift with each new edition. The inability to reach consensus has, paradoxically, kept interest alive. Mysteries with answers fade, but those without remain evergreen in curiosity and speculation. Standing before Dighton Rock today, whether in its museum setting or through archival photographs, you are confronted with an object that resists closure. Its markings are real, deliberate, and undeniably human, yet their meaning drifts just beyond grasp. Over time, the rock has been claimed by different narratives as proof of old-world contact, as a sacred indigenous record, as a riddle for historians. This multiplicity of meanings may itself be the truest reflection of its legacy. Rather than belonging wholly to one culture or era, Dighton Rock has become a shared point of wonder, a touchstone for debates about history, identity, and interpretation. It reminds us that not every mystery must be solved to be valuable. Some are most powerful when they remain open, inviting each generation to approach with fresh eyes and new questions. In this way, Dighton Rock is less a solved puzzle than a constant invitation to imagine the breadth of human possibility. In the quiet green heart of Newport, Rhode Island, stands a circular stone tower that has fueled centuries of debate. Known as the Newport Tower, it rises on 8 sturdy pillars, supporting a ring of arches and an upper cylinder that once may have supported a floor or roof. Made of fieldstone and mortar, the structure is weathered but still remarkably intact. Officially, mainstream historians describe it as the remains of a 17th century windmill built by Governor Benedict Arnold, modelled after English designs. Yet, from the moment early antiquarians saw it, they suspected something far older and stranger. Its form, more reminiscent of medieval European or even Norse architecture than colonial New England, has inspired theories of Viking builders, Knights Templar, and Portuguese explorers. The absence of definitive construction records only deepens the intrigue. Whether you see a relic of colonial industry or a marker of pre-Columbian contact, standing beneath its arches stirs a sense of stepping into a fragment torn from another time. The earliest written reference to the Newport Tower dates to the mid-1600s, describing it as a nice stone-built windmill in the will of Governor Arnold. For traditional historians, this is proof enough of its origin, but skeptics point out that structures of similar style are unknown elsewhere in colonial America, raising questions about where the design came from. In the 18th and 19th centuries, the tower became a magnet for speculative theories. Danish antiquarians claimed it as evidence of Norse exploration, linking it to the voyages of Leif Erikson. Some suggested it was built by the Knights Templar, using symbolic measurements aligned with sacred geometry. Others saw a link to early Portuguese navigators, pointing to similarities with watchtowers in the Azores. Even amateur astronomers entered the debate, noting how the tower's windows might align with solstice sunrises or other celestial events. These varied theories kept the structure in public imagination, transforming it from a functional ruin into an archaeological enigma. Examining the Newport Tower closely reveals details that complicate its supposed colonial origin. The mortar has been dated using various methods, some suggesting a range that could predate English settlement. The arches are evenly spaced, but not perfectly symmetrical, hinting at either a unique aesthetic choice or limitations in available tools. Some of the small windows seem oddly placed for a mere windmill, potentially serving observational purposes rather than practical ones. Comparisons have been drawn to medieval Norse round churches, particularly those in Greenland, though direct evidence linking the tower to such structures remains absent. The building's elevated design would have made it highly visible to ships entering Narragansett Bay, which could indicate a navigational role. Yet the lack of documented use as a lighthouse or watchtower leaves its purpose open to question. The more one studies its stones, the more the building resists settling into a single category. It is neither entirely colonial nor definitively ancient, but a hybrid form that keeps its builder's intent hidden. One of the more fascinating aspects of the Newport Tower mystery involves claims of astronomical alignment. Amateur researchers in the 20th century noted that certain windows and openings align with sunrise or sunset during solstices and equinoxes. This has led to speculation that the tower was intentionally designed as an observatory, a feature not commonly associated with colonial windmills. Supporters of this theory point to cultures, both European and indigenous, that incorporated celestial tracking into their architecture. Critics counter that such alignments can occur by coincidence, especially in circular structures with multiple openings. Still, the idea persists because it adds another layer of sophistication to the tower's design. If intentional, it would suggest the builders had both astronomical knowledge and a symbolic or practical reason to encode it in stone. Whether or not the alignments were deliberate, they have become part of the tower's legend, ensuring that even the sun's path plays a role in its enduring enigma. Over the years, archaeologists have conducted digs around the Newport Tower, uncovering colonial-era artifacts such as clay pipes, ceramics, and nails, evidence of activity during the 17th and 18th centuries. These finds support the mainstream interpretation of the structure's age. However, the absence of earlier artifacts does not conclusively rule out a pre-colonial origin, as earlier material could have been removed, buried deeper, or simply never present. Some investigations have tried to date the mortar and stonework directly, but results have varied, sometimes suggesting a construction date decades, or even centuries, earlier than Governor Arnold's lifetime. These conflicting data points fuel the ongoing debate, with each side interpreting the evidence to support its own theory. The digs have also revealed that the tower was once part of a larger complex of buildings and gardens, complicating efforts to view it in isolation. In the end, archaeology has offered tantalizing hints but no definitive answer, leaving the mystery intact. Today, the Newport Tower stands as both a historical landmark and a symbol of unresolved history. Tourists stroll through Truro Park, snapping photos beneath its weathered arches, often unaware of the centuries-long debate surrounding it. For locals, it is a familiar silhouette against the skyline. For researchers, it is a challenge to pin down in time and purpose. The state has embraced its ambiguity, recognizing that the tower's power lies partly in the fact that it refuses to be fully explained. It invites imagination, whether one pictures Viking ships on the horizon, secretive medieval orders, or simply colonial builders with an unusual taste in architecture. In this way, the Newport Tower transcends its physical form to become an enduring riddle, reminding us that even in a small New England park, the past can still keep its secrets close. Along the rocky shoreline of North Kingstown, in the area known as Quignesset, lie a series of mysterious carvings, etched into weathered stone. They are positioned where the land meets the tidal waters of Narragansett Bay, partially concealed by seaweed at high tide, and revealed only when the water recedes. These carvings, lines, geometric shapes, and what some interpret as human or animal figures, are so eroded that identifying them with certainty is nearly impossible. Local lore claims they were created long before European settlement, possibly by indigenous peoples or even pre-Columbian visitors from across the Atlantic. Their location suggests they may have served as navigational markers, territorial symbols, or records of significant events. Yet, no conclusive study has determined their exact age or meaning. Standing on the shore as waves lap over the stone, you can't help but feel that these marks are fragments of a message sent from a time we can barely imagine. The Narragansett and other indigenous groups have deep historical ties to Rhode Island's coastline, and some researchers believe the Quignesset carvings are an extension of that cultural heritage. Certain motifs resemble petroglyphs found further inland, associated with spiritual beliefs, seasonal changes, or clan identities. The proximity to the bay could indicate that the carvings were part of fishing or navigation traditions, marking areas rich in resources or safe landing spots. Oral histories, however, rarely mention the specific carvings, leaving open the possibility that their significance was lost over generations. Archaeologists caution against jumping to exotic explanations before fully exploring indigenous origins, as these communities had rich symbolic languages that remain underdocumented. If the carvings are indeed native in origin, they may hold clues to coastal lifeways and belief systems that existed here for centuries before Europeans arrived, offering a tangible link to a worldview in which land and water were inseparably sacred. Not all scholars are satisfied with the indigenous-only explanation. A more controversial theory suggests that the Quignesset carvings may be evidence of contact between Old World explorers and North America long before Columbus. Proponents point to similarities between certain geometric designs here and rock art found in parts of Scandinavia, Iberia, and even the British Isles. Some argue that Norse explorers, possibly linked to the Vinland sagas, could have ventured this far south, leaving behind symbolic records. Others speculate about Portuguese or Basque fishermen marking favoured harbours centuries before official European colonisation. Critics counter that geometric carvings are common across cultures, and resemblance alone is not proof of contact. Still, the possibility fuels fascination. If authentic, these carvings could rewrite chapters of maritime history, showing that Rhode Island's shores were touched by hands from across the ocean in eras officially unrecorded. Determining the age of rock carvings is notoriously difficult. Unlike organic material, stone cannot be directly radiocarbon dated. Researchers must rely on indirect clues, such as the degree of weathering, the patina on carved surfaces, or the presence of lichen. In Quidnasset, tidal action complicates matters further. Saltwater erosion can accelerate weathering, making even relatively recent carvings appear ancient. Occasional marine growth obscures details, and seasonal ice can fracture the stone. Some studies using microscopic analysis have suggested the carvings could be several hundred years old, while others believe they might be far older. Without a secure dating method, the carvings remain locked in a liminal space, old enough to be mysterious, yet not old enough to be beyond debate. This uncertainty is part of what makes them so compelling. They are artifacts that refuse to be pinned down in time. The Quidnasset carvings exist in a delicate balance between exposure and preservation. On one hand, their accessibility means they can be appreciated by anyone willing to walk the shoreline at low tide. On the other, that same accessibility leaves them vulnerable to damage, both from natural forces and from human interference. Some locals worry that increased publicity could lead to vandalism, while others argue that awareness is the best path to preservation. Efforts have been made to document the carvings through high-resolution photography and 3D scanning, capturing details before they fade entirely. These digital records could one day allow researchers to analyze the carvings in ways not yet possible, perhaps unlocking more of their story. For now, they remain an open-air mystery, protected mostly by their obscurity and the rhythm of the tides. Today, the Quidnasset carvings remain an enigma, silent markings that spark questions about who made them, why they chose this spot, and what they intended to communicate. To some, they are sacred indigenous heritage. To others, tantalizing hints of forgotten voyages. The truth may lie somewhere in between, or in an explanation we have yet to imagine. Visitors who stumble upon them often feel a jolt of connection to the unknown, a reminder that history is not a closed book, but a living, shifting puzzle. In their weathered grooves, one can sense the persistence of human curiosity and creativity, carried forward on the waves of time. As long as they endure, these carvings will continue to invite interpretation, speculation, and wonder, an enduring mystery etched into Rhode Island's shoreline. Along the muddy banks of the Taunton River, where the tide moves with an unhurried rhythm, rests a massive boulder that has stirred centuries of speculation. Known as Dighton Rock, this 11-foot-long, 5-foot-high slab of dark, fine-grained sandstone is covered in strange carvings, lines, loops, geometric shapes, human-like figures, and animal forms etched deeply into its surface. The carvings defy easy categorization, appearing neither purely decorative nor entirely utilitarian. First documented by European settlers in the late 1600s, the rock was already a local curiosity, its origins unknown even to the native peoples then inhabiting the region. Since then, historians, scientists, and amateur sleuths have all tried to decipher its meaning, each new theory adding another layer to its mythos. Was it a marker left by ancient travelers, a sacred site for rituals, or a visual record of an encounter lost to time? The Taunton River's position as a thoroughfare connecting the coast to inland New England makes the site plausible for trade, migration, or even exploration from distant lands. Yet, for every interpretation, there is a counter-argument. No single explanation satisfies all the evidence. Standing before Dighton Rock, one feels the same perplexity that must have gripped its earliest observers. Here lies a message from the past, written in a language that may never be understood. Many archaeologists maintain that the most plausible explanation is also the most grounded, that the carvings were made by the region's indigenous peoples, particularly the Wampanoag, whose history in southern New England stretches back thousands of years. Some symbols on the rock resemble patterns seen in other known native petroglyphs, representations of spirit beings, celestial bodies, or mythic animals. These could have been tied to seasonal cycles, navigational routes, or ceremonial events. The Taunton River itself was a lifeline, providing access to fishing, trade, and communication between coastal and inland communities. It's not hard to imagine that such a prominent riverside boulder could have served as a territorial marker or a gathering point for significant rituals. However, no surviving Wampanoag oral tradition directly explains the meaning of Dighton Rock's carvings, which opens the possibility that they predate even the oldest remembered stories. This absence leaves room for competing interpretations and allows fringe theories to take root. For indigenous communities today, the rock remains a cultural touchstone, whether or not its creators can be named, representing a physical link to ancestral lands. Preserving it is not simply an archaeological matter, but an act of cultural stewardship. Each groove and symbol may carry meanings only fully appreciated by those who view it as part of a living heritage, even if outsiders see only an unsolved puzzle. For those drawn to more adventurous possibilities, the Dighton Rock carvings might not be local at all. In the 19th century, the idea that Norse explorers left their mark here gained traction, fueled by the confirmed Viking presence in Newfoundland and the tantalizing Vinland sagas. Enthusiasts claim that some of the rock's markings can be read as runic inscriptions, chronicling voyages or territorial claims far south of the known Norse settlements. Another popular theory points to Portuguese explorers, specifically Miguel Corte Real, a navigator who vanished in the early 1500s. Proponents of this theory believe some carvings resemble early 16th century Portuguese script or heraldic symbols. These interpretations often depend heavily on selective readings of the carvings, as well as the assumption that contact between Europe and North America was more widespread before Columbus than conventional history accepts. Critics argue that human perception is prone to pareidolia, the tendency to see familiar shapes where none were intended, and that without contextual artifacts like tools or campsites, such identifications remain speculative. Yet the allure of imagining old-world sailors standing on the Taunton shore, carving messages into stone for future generations, keeps these theories alive. Dighton Rock, with its ambiguous forms, becomes a kind of historical mirror, reflecting back the hopes, biases, and ambitions of whoever is interpreting it. While speculation abounds, modern researchers have turned to technology in hopes of cutting through the centuries of mystery. High-resolution 3D scanning, digital photogrammetry, and microscopic wear analysis now allow scientists to capture every contour of the carvings, revealing details invisible to the naked eye. By studying the depth, angle, and weathering of each line, researchers can determine whether multiple groups worked on the rock at different times. This layered approach suggests that Dighton Rock may not be the product of a single culture or period, but a palimpsest, its surface reused and reinterpreted over centuries. Environmental factors complicate the picture. Positioned in a tidal zone, the rock was subjected to constant wetting and drying, sediment abrasion, and the growth of algae and lichens, all of which obscure and distort the carvings. The inability to directly date stone means researchers must rely on comparisons with dated carvings elsewhere, or with archaeological finds from the surrounding area. So far, no definitive link has been established. Every technological breakthrough seems to answer small questions while leaving the central mystery intact. The rock remains stubborn, as if it knows its value lies as much in the questions it raises as in the answers it might eventually yield. In the mid-20th century, concerns about erosion, vandalism, and riverbank instability prompted the removal of Dighton Rock from its natural setting. It was relocated to Dighton Rock State Park, where it now sits inside a protective building that shields it from the elements. This preservation effort ensured that the carvings would survive for future generations, but it also fundamentally changed the experience of viewing the rock. No longer does it stand on the tidal flats, half submerged at high water and exposed at low tide. Visitors now see it under steady lighting, accompanied by interpretive plaques and displays outlining various theories. This controlled environment offers clarity and accessibility, but it also strips away the atmospheric conditions, shifting light, glistening water, the smell of the river that may have been integral to its original meaning. For researchers, the move provided an opportunity for careful study in a stable setting. For some enthusiasts, however, it diminished the rock's aura, making it feel more like an artifact in a case than a living piece of the landscape. This tension between preservation and authenticity is a constant challenge in archaeology, where saving the past sometimes means altering it forever. Dighton Rock is more than just a stone with carvings. It's a cultural Rorschach test. Over the centuries, it has been claimed as evidence of indigenous heritage, Viking exploration, Portuguese navigation, and even far more exotic theories involving ancient transoceanic contact. Its true origin may never be proven beyond doubt, and perhaps that is part of its enduring appeal. People are drawn to mysteries that resist closure. They invite endless retellings, each shaped by the teller's perspective. As it sits now under the museum's lights, the rock is both protected and contained, its story curated for the public. Yet for those who know its history, each mark in its surface whispers of hands long vanished, of cultures whose paths may have crossed here in ways we can only imagine. In the end, Dighton Rock stands as a reminder that the past is not a fixed narrative, but a mosaic of possibilities. Some grounded in evidence, others in the imagination, all waiting for someone to look closely and wonder anew. Rhode Island's landscape may seem small in size, but the mysteries it carries are vast, etched in stone, buried in soil, and whispered by the tide. From enigmatic carvings and lost settlements to unexplained artifacts that defy neat categorization, these are not simply tales of the past. They are puzzles that challenge our present understanding of human history. Each site leaves us with fragments of a bigger picture, a missing chapter in the story of who walked these shores long before our modern maps were drawn. Science continues to probe, measure, and hypothesize, yet some questions remain stubbornly beyond reach. Were these relics the work of familiar cultures, their meanings lost to time, or do they point to encounters and events we have yet to imagine? The truth, if it exists in complete form, is hidden not just in the ground, but in the persistence of curiosity itself. As the sun dips behind Rhode Island's rocky coast, casting long shadows over its ancient stones, one thing is certain: mysteries such as these are not solved in a single lifetime. They endure, waiting for the next seeker to step forward, ready to ask, to listen, and perhaps to uncover what has always been just out of reach.